William F. Buckley Jr. offers 20 years of firing line guests from the 60s to the 80s. For $19.95, you can receive this companion book by calling 1-800-872-8188. Credit cards are acceptable. Or send a check to Firing Line, 2700 Cypress Street, Columbia, South Carolina, 29205.
Welcome to Firing Line. I'm Michael Kinsley of the New Republic magazine. In June, the Supreme Court ruled that the constitutional freedom of religion does not give American Indians the right to consume peyote as part of a religious ceremony. You would not think that this decision would alarm America's larger and more conventional denominations, but you would be wrong. The National Council of Churches, the American Jewish Congress, the Baptists, the Evangelicals, the Quakers, and so on have all raised their voices in a choir of protest. What concerns the religious leaders is not so much the court's decision as the reasoning Justice Scalia used in reaching it. Scalia declared that a generally applicable law or regulation, such as a law against drugs, is not unconstitutional just because it places an incidental burden on religion. The First Amendment is only violated if a law is, quote, specifically directed at a religious act. This would seem to contradict past Supreme Court rulings that the government cannot interfere with the practices of religion unless there is a, quote, compelling state interest, which means a damn good reason. Critics of the court's ruling raise the specter of laws forbidding kosher meat or the use of wine in the Roman Catholic Mass. More generally, this ruling raises once again the question whether we are a secular society that tolerates religion or a society in which religious values in any conflict are paramount. And it has also created a delightful split among conservatives. Some rejoice in Scalia's ruling as another blow against judicial activism and the over-imaginative interpretation of the Bill of Rights. Others fear for their sacraments. Mr. Buckley's guests are one spokesman each for the laws of God and the laws of man. Pastor Richard John Newhouse is a Lutheran clergyman, author of many books, director of the Institute of Religion and Public Life, and, not incidentally, religion editor of the National Review. Charles Freed is Carter Professor of General Jurisprudence at Harvard Law School. He served as Solicitor General of the United States during the second term of President Reagan, and he's got a book to plug, which is called Order and Law, Arguing the Revolution. Mr. Buckley, if the court had ruled the other way, what would there be to stop me from founding a religion based on, say, the worship of William F. Buckley and the consumption of vast amounts of marijuana?
My failure to have died and ascended into heaven on the third day. A religion based around me would not be very convincing, but I see the point that you're groping for, which is that if one takes the notion that the free exercise of religion permits a religion to write laws which contradict the standards of society, you could theoretically have such situations develop among the Mormons in the late part of the 19th century, in which we either were or we were not going to defend monogamy. Now, how do you handle that, by the way, Pastor Newhouse? How did the Supreme Court vote correctly on the Mormon decisions?
Well, Justice Scalia raised in his opinion for the majority precisely the kind of question that Mr. Kinsley raised. And I think Justice Sandra Day O'Connor quite rightly criticized Scalia for this, pointing out that this was a parade of horribles that he was throwing out there, which was really an argument against the free exercise of religion itself. And he was writing as though we did not have 200 years' experience with the First Amendment. The critical thing, it seems to me, in the so-called peyote ruling or Oregon versus Smith, the critical thing is precisely as the churches are claiming and the synagogues are claiming, is with the reasoning, the philosophy, if you will. The founding vision of the First Amendment religion clause, with its two parts, no establishment and free exercise, was, as Michael McConnell in the recent Harvard Law Review argues, rightly, I think, the founders' intention to say that the state is limited by a higher sovereignty, and that religion in society is the carrier of that witness. Madison, of course, would be the chief architect and articulator of that way of thinking of our Constitution.
Have you got a historical or a scholarly problem with that summary?
I think
Professor
I
Braden?
do. It seems to me that the religion clauses, of course, did indicate a very important role for religion. But it's a very common sense one. On one hand, no religious persecution and leave religious people alone and don't interfere with them. But that doesn't mean that they are free to interfere with the rights of other people. That's the place where this gets to be difficult. So that you have the case which I think illustrates this so nicely, and these cases are coming up a lot in terms of Indian religions, which are rather unfamiliar with us and have all kinds of tenets which many of us have difficulty grasping. That was a case where the Forest Service had a road. It was an unpaved road between two towns, and it was on Forest Service land, didn't belong to the Indians, wasn't an Indian reservation, nothing of the sort. And they wanted to pave the road so the people in those two towns could communicate easily. And the Indians said, you mustn't do that because that land is sacred to us. Now, I think there's something a little bit disturbing about people quite sincerely being able to say, no, you mustn't pave a road on government land which doesn't belong to the Indians,
But
belongs
Mr. Freed,
because it will be disturbing to us and thereby upset the ability of the people living in those two towns to go from one to the other.
But doesn't that, along with the Smith case on peyote, precisely indicate our experience with being able to demonstrate a compelling governmental interest that in the case of the road and in the case of peyote, the court ruled overrides the religious claim. The critical thing about the Smith decision is that long, long history where someone has to come with a claim and say, I got a free exercise of religion claim here. And then we have decision after decision after decision in which the court either says that there is a compelling governmental interest that overrides that claim, or there is not. Just as free speech is not an absolute right, or
Okay.
free association is not an absolute right.